Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap-up for November of 2023. So in this monthly wrap-up, I'm going to very quickly summarize the books that I read, ones that I completed reading at least, in November of 2023. And this is the top of the pile right here. I usually average maybe like 5 books a month, sometimes 4, sometimes 6, kind of depending on the length of the books and how much time I've had to read. I have, I think, about 10 here, maybe, which is way more than what I usually get through. I'm not sure what it was about November of this past month. I was just flying through books at a rate that I usually don't. October is always a really busy month in our house. It's my favorite month. It's got Halloween. I live in New England, and the autumn weather is beautiful around here, and we're always really busy. And then in November, things finally do actually start slowing down. We had weekends opening up, and I actually had time to sit down and read a lot more. So that's definitely a part of it. And also, I just feel like I was reading faster than I usually read. I was kind of tearing through books in a way that I don't usually. And I don't think that's going to necessarily keep up, but it was nice while it lasted, if it doesn't last. So I am going to go, very quickly. And I will say that I've been on booktube now for a few years. This might be the biggest wrap up that I've ever done as far as number of books. That's definitely a strong possibility. I didn't look into confirm that because I'm kind of lazy that way. But yeah, it's probably true. So let's begin. And by the way, all these books I have talked about in more detail in previous videos, mostly the Fresh Read Kills videos, where I talk about books I have recently finished reading. So if you're curious about further thoughts that I have about any of these books, you can go back into those episodes. This really is going to be about just generally summarizing what was the book about, what did I think of it. So the first one, The Great Leveler, Violence and the History of Inequality from the Stone Age to the 21st Century by Walter Scheidel. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And it's from Princeton University Press. Earlier in the year, I did a Princeton University Press book haul, but that was also during my book ban. Basically, I vowed to read 50 books before I bought any new books. And about halfway through that, I got pretty bored with it, and Princeton had a really good sale, and I'm like, I feel stupid not getting it. So I got it, and in order to kind of make up for it, I had vowed to read those books before the end of the year. This was really the last one that I had to read for that, that vow that I made. And it's a thicker book. I actually began this in October, and I finished it in November. And one of the things that I had said in my review is that, the actual reading experience is not as juicy as the title and subtitle would kind of make it out to be. The inequality that is being spoken of here is really strictly income inequality, which means that this is actually a very economic book with lots of data, lots of graphs and charts, which, as far as scholarship is concerned, it's very good scholarship. I don't fault it. I don't fault the history at all in here, but it doesn't make for a page turner. There is not much in the way of, I would say, social history at all. So you don't have to have a strong economic background, but I would suggest that readers have a strong world history background in order to really get what these numbers about inequality mean. Because certainly, the top 10% in one culture in one time period can be very different from the 10% in another culture in another time period, because this really does bounce around throughout various geographic areas and also time periods. So be aware of that as well for this. Now, I'm glad I read it. I do think it's good scholarship. If you are somebody who is economically minded, I think that you would probably really like this, maybe more than I did. Again, not a bad book at all. It just was not my style, not the kind of history that really draws me and engages me. And the overall thesis of this is that inequality it seems fairly natural to humans. It's been around since the very beginning of time. He is not promoting inequality. He is just basically saying it seems to have always been here. And the only things that have really made a difference, the only things that have really leveled income equality are major disasters. And this could be major mobilization of warfare. It can be the failure of the state. It could be revolution, or it could be disease and epidemics going through. That's essentially what he's doing. He's tracing those things and seeing how the income inequality decreased during those times of crisis. So that is that one. I also read this here, and these are mostly in order of read, but not exactly. It's close enough. This is Tales from the Haunted South, Dark Tourism and Memories of Slavery in the Civil War Area by Tiya, Tiya Miles. And this is from the University of North Carolina Press. So I do have I have an interest in history, but also in horror, macabre, and also I love ghost stories. I'm not a ghost believer, but I do have a fascination with the kind of ghost stories we tell and why we tell them. And this is essentially a historian who is looking at the dark tourism of ghost tours in the Deep South, and especially as they depict female slaves. That's really what the focus is here. She looks at Savannah, New Orleans, the Myrtles Plantation, and she finds essentially that a lot of the stories of slaves are, for one, sensationalized. Sometimes they actually do, unfortunately, can reinforce unfortunate stereotypes. They are usually also made up, except for a few instances. However, there is still some good here that can be had, because they're one of the few tours that were actually, at least at this time, she published this in the mid 2010s. They were the only tours that were really dealing head on with slavery and the memory of slaves, especially female slaves. So even though it's problematic, she does see it as potentially being a really good thing as far as historical memory and also tourism. So I like this overall. I think she could have gone a little bit deeper in her analysis in some ways, especially for why people were making up certain stories. But I did like it overall, and it was a very quick read. And I read Forever Nerdy by Brian Posehn, Living My Dorky Dreams and Staying Metal. Now, I don't read a lot of autobiographies, and I have read one other comedian's autobiography. About 2 years ago for Nonfiction November, I had read George Carlin's last autobiography before he passed away. And this is one that I got. There's another one in here that I got pretty cheap from Hamilton Books one time. I think I got this for like $1, and I thought, okay, yeah, I'll give it a try. I've enjoyed a lot of Brian Posehn stuff in the past. I had listened to his podcast, Nerd Poker. He plays D&D, seen some of his stand-up, that sort of thing. And I was aware that he had a lot of similar interests that I also had. Things like Dungeons and Dragons, horror movies, metal music. So that's one of the reasons I picked this up. I was also curious to hear his experiences growing up a nerd in like the 70s and the 80s, of course, before nerd culture became mainstream culture. It's just a topic that I find interesting. That's what all it is. And I like this. I think, he does a really good job actually with his childhood and his teenage years. He kind of flies through a lot of his adult years. And he also has chapters that focus on his nerdy interests. So it could be Kiss, horror movies, things like that. And I think that people will find that interesting insofar as they are also interested in those subjects. I said in my original video that he has a chapter dedicated to Rush. I respect Rush as musicians, but I'm not somebody who really connects with their music, so that is not a chapter that I had great interest in. So, anyhow, regardless, it was very quick, and this is one that I also was listening to the audiobook with, which he read, so you can also hear a lot of his humor because he's given the proper inflection to his jokes. So I would actually recommend the audiobook for this. The way I do audiobooks, I don't listen to audiobooks I don't have a physical copy of, generally. I like to be able to go back and forth or sometimes do immersive reading. The next book is one that I finished in November. I didn't begin this in November. I began it many months ago, at least half a year ago. And this is The Sword, Form and Thought. This is from Boydell Press. And this is a series of essays that were delivered at a sword conference in Germany in the mid-2010s. And they essentially put most of those essays into here, which, as you just saw, I think, from the page I showed, some really nice full-color photos. Just some beautiful stuff in here. That was definitely one of the major attractions for me. I am something of a sword enthusiast, a sword geek. If I had more money, I would be more of a sword collector. But I do have some swords, but you know, it takes a long time for me to be able to really dish out money for new ones. This is going to be only really of interest to sword enthusiasts. The essays are written in a very academic manner. So what I did was I would finish a book, and then I would pick this up and read an essay, and then I put it down, then finish a book, pick it up, read an essay, and eventually I got through it. So finished it in November. Definitely something that's up my alley. It's not going to be up a lot of other people's alleys. And I got this on sale from Boydell Press, because originally this is actually a pretty expensive book. This next one, this was a nonfiction November read that I kind of decided at the last moment to pick up. So this is Eduardo Galeano, Soccer in Sun and Shadow. He was a Uruguayan and passed away in 2015. And this is essentially his take on the history of soccer. From its beginnings in the 1800s up until, well, this is a revised edition that has rating all the way up, I think, until the 2010 World Cup. And most of it is very short vignettes. So there's kind of some history, then he'll focus in on great plays. But it's very, very poetic in a lot of ways. I did find these things actually were, I think, some factual inaccuracies that I was picking up on as I was going through. This is not an authoritative history of soccer. It is not supposed to be an objective history of soccer. It's not intending to be those things, and it's definitely not that. It is very much from his perspective. It's from a very Latin American perspective, which means that, not just the United States, but also Europe, I think, kind of get short shrift in this. And as the book goes on, he gets more and more ranty about, FIFA deservedly, but also how the sport had been changing, and he wasn't liking the changes. So I do like this book. I will say I had some issues, which I talked about more in detail in my video about this. Yeah, once again, another one that, I enjoyed overall. So that is Soccer in Sun and Shadow, Eduardo Galeano. Next, this was a pretty quick read, fortunately, because even though it looks longer than it is, but there are a lot of pages with these, like there's a whole middle section with full plate images, and even throughout, there's a lot of images in here that you're only reading one page. The other page, you don't really have to read anything except for a caption. So you can actually get through this book very quickly, which I did. This is Causes Won, Lost, and Forgotten, How Hollywood and Popular Culture Shape What We Know About the Civil War by Gary W. Gallagher. Now, I do have an interest in historical memory, also especially of the Civil War. And what he's doing is, what he's looking at here, this was published in 2008, I believe. Just confirm that. Yeah, 2008. This is also from University of North Carolina Press, just like that Dark Tourism book that I had read. And he's looking at the 20 years up to this publication, so around 1988 to 2008, of the ways that the Civil War was shown in film and also in fine art. And what sort of patterns can we see? And he essentially identifies different ways or themes that you can look at the Civil War through. It can be the lost cause, which of course was very popular up until at least the 1960s or so. There is kind of a union theme. People, basically showing Union soldiers being motivated by preserving the Union, which was actually really the cause, except ironically, that's not really what Hollywood ever shows. That was really their motivation. There's the emancipation theme, where it was all really about the abolition of slavery, which is, definitely a secondary concern for most Union soldiers. And there's the reconciliation theme, focusing on how the North and South, they can really come together. And usually that comes at the cost of not really focusing on slavery or the division between the two sides. In which Hollywood does also look at that one a lot. That comes up quite a bit, the reconciliationist theme. And I'm hoping I'm remembering these right as far as what he calls them, but it's close enough. I think you get the point. And, he finds that the The Lost Cause has disappeared a lot, although not entirely. Certainly Gods and Generals is guilty of it. And after this publication, there were other films that came out that still clung to The Lost Cause. As I said, he found that the Union theme certainly did not get nearly enough attention in this. And emancipation and reconciliation come up quite a bit. And it's pretty fascinating. So even though Lost Cause, though, is disappearing as far as cinema is concerned, it does not seem to be disappearing as far as fine art. So the people who are buying Civil War artwork are probably people who, at least according to the way these paintings are painted, are probably sympathetic, at the very least, to a Lost Cause interpretation. So, you know, interesting topic for me. I really like this. Another one, really quick read. So, I mean, I understand in some ways how I got through 10 books, because some of these books are really quick, like something like this. This doesn't take long to get through it all. This is Persepolis, the story of a childhood, which I understand that there is a second part. I don't have the second part. I got this for, I think, like $1 or 50 cents at a library book sale. And I am doing a 25 book challenge. I started it in October, where I'm not going to buy any books until I've read 25 books I already own. And so I'm sticking with the stuff I have. And I'd read this as part of Historathon 2023. And this is essentially a recounting from Marjane Satrapi. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but her growing up in Iran during the revolution in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and how things changed. How, you know, her people's idealism of getting rid of the Shah really kind of quickly goes away once theocracy firmly takes hold, and really the only way that she can be as free as she wants to be, and ultimately, is to leave Iran. And, you know, looking at the different people they've lost along the way. And here's some of the illustrations. This is a pretty well-known graphic novel. I think most people are familiar with this. I just hadn't read it yet. And I liked it. It does feel like something that could have been really written for and given to like young adults, at least, younger readers, except there is every so often some profanity. So as like I'm somebody who's a middle school teacher, I would have loved to be able to use this in school, but it just like kind of just doesn't allow me to because of some of those moments. But I did overall like it. I'm curious about the second half. Excuse me. I also read/listened to this one, Mallory O'Meara's Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Milicent Patrick. And this is another one that I think the audiobook was quite good. Mallory O'Meara does a very good job of reading her own book. And she's also a pretty good writer. And she's also a horror film producer. And Milicent Patrick was a woman who was a kind of a production designer, I guess you could say. She also worked in animation, but throughout the 1940s and 1950s. And she is the primary designer for the creature of the Black Lagoon, that creature. However, due to some jealous men, and of course the sexism of the time, she was not given the credit, and her memory was kind of pushed out. So this is to rectify that. So as I said in my other video, Mallory O'Meara has an axe to grind, and she really grinds it. And that can also be a little bit of a drawback of this. Not that she doesn't have legitimate things to gripe about, but sometimes the griping can, you know, make you fall off track for what you were trying to read about. So part of this is about a biography of Milicent Patrick. Part of it is also about Mallory O'Meara's investigation into finding out about Milicent Patrick, and she also shares some of her own personal experiences being in the film world, especially where sexism played a role. And it's also basically about the way that women have been treated in the entertainment industry for the past 100 years. So all three of those things are really at play. And I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. Like I said, I did have that little couple moments there where I'm like, okay, I get the point. You don't have to keep hitting me over the head with it. And also I do kind of think that she could have maybe done a more thorough job of debunking those people who said that Milicent Patrick wasn't the designer, that she doesn't really lay out their case and thoroughly go through it. She kind of just dismisses it very quickly as sexism. So I just would have liked to see something a little more thorough in that respect. But glad I read this. This is one of those things that have been sitting on my shelf for a really long time. And glad I got to it. Two more. Okay. Stiff by Mary Roach. The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers. So essentially the way that human bodies have been used, mostly these days, but she does go back in time and look at, in the past, how human bodies were used for experimentation, for the benefits of medical science, to look at like bone trauma, to basically rot in university fields in order to help with forensics. Looking at resurrectionists like Burke and Hare. So this is a very interesting, very, I think, engaging look at human bodies. One of the things that she is really kind of promoting in here is people donating their bodies to medical science or whatever people might need human bodies for. No matter what, your body is going to rot and it's going to be gross. Maybe you might be able to have somebody benefit from it. There is some humor in here, especially in the beginning. I found that she uses a lot more jokes in the first half than in the second half. They do kind of wane a little bit. There were moments where I kind of cringed a little bit at some of the humor, not because I thought it was entirely inappropriate, just because it was just kind of coming so thick and fast, and not every low-hanging fruit needs to be plucked. But overall, I did like it, and I do look forward to reading her book, Spook, which I have behind me on the shelf over here somewhere. And I'll read that at some point within the next year. And lastly, the last thing that I read in November, Accidental Czar. This is a graphic novel about the life and lives of Vladimir Putin, written by Andrew S. Weiss and illustrated by Brian Box Brown. Illustrations are pretty rudimentary. You can read this very quickly, certainly in a single sitting. And it essentially is looking at how Vladimir Putin rose to power, the kind of tactics that he uses, what his worldview is, and why it's like that. This is definitely from a very American democratic point of view. So people like Trump do not come off well in this, and I don't think he should. So, have that in your in your mind if you're interested in this. And it does, thankfully, go right up to the invasion of Ukraine. This was published in 2022, and I think the afterword just talks about basically the Russian tanks moving in to Ukraine. So gives a lot of really great background historical context for that as well. So I would recommend this. I got this super cheap on Hamilton Books. I don't know if it's still on there at all. I don't think it is. So I don't know if it's worth. This is $28.99. I wouldn't tell people to go spend $30 for this, but if you can find it really cheap, I would definitely check it out. And that's it, finally, mercifully. Those are all the books that I read in November of 2023, which again, for me, that's a lot of books. I'm trying to hold this up. So we've got The Great Leveler. We've got Tales from the Haunted South, Forever Nerdy, The Sword, Soccer and Sun and Shadow, Causes One Lost and Forgotten, Persepolis, Lady from the Black Lagoon, Stiff, and Accidental Czar. If you've read any of these, love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.